The feeling of getting outplayed by luck or random factors out of your control can be some of the most frustrating things to deal with. RNG is something that exists in every video game, but not all of it is bad, and some RNG is necessary to balance a game and keep it exciting. Does Valorant have too many RNG mechanics that hurt it more than help it? Well, we're here to discuss and find out. What is going on, ProGuides family? It's your host, Sergeant Frost, and today we'll be talking about the main RNG mechanics that affect Valorant as a tactical FPS. We'll talk about why some of these are unhealthy and why some of them aren't so terrible, but may need tweaking. The goal here is for us to become aware of the role of RNG in competitive games and how they can affect the outcomes and therefore shape the meta. But if you want a guaranteed no RNG method of improving in Valorant, make sure to check out our website ProGuides.com, where our Radiant and Immortal level coaches are more than happy to lend a helping hand. On top of that, we've recently partnered with pros like Tens and Scream, who have released their own personal guides to help you master the fundamentals and learn the specific tools to elevate your gameplay. Now, let's jump right into the video. Perhaps one of the biggest things we need to consider before talking about specific RNG mechanics is how RNG factors into a game. Some of this is variance, probability, and actual random number generators, but the distinctions are often very advanced and nuanced. So we'll think of everything that can affect an outcome randomly as quote-unquote RNG. When we talk about a competitive game, the core aspect of what makes something competitive is the opportunity to showcase skills and win with superior gameplay. This is pretty obvious. If you're better than your opponents, then you should win against them. But of course, we are only human, so a level of natural RNG is some form of human error. For example, I miss a shot that I normally hit because I make a mistake sometimes. Or I had a bad night of sleep and I'm not playing on my A game that day. These are some forms of natural variance, and they are uncontrollable for the most part in a competitive scene. This makes each fight slightly varied in result based on some factors outside of the player's individual skill. That means sometimes a weaker player will beat a stronger player, yet individual skill still shines at the end. However, if you add too many factors of RNG into a game, then individual skill starts to take a backseat and RNG begins to decide a game. For example, imagine if every shot you took had a chance of being a blank, or something stupid like that. This would make it so that sometimes a better player will lose because their gunshot blanks while the weaker player's gun didn't. That wouldn't be fair, right? RNG in some forms will make the game feel more like a coin flip rather than a skill-based game, and it could hurt competitive integrity, and also considerably lower the skill gap. Imagine if the game was so random that every fight you took was always a 50-50, regardless of your skill. Would there be any pro teams then? Probably not, because you can't win with skill, it's just gambling at that point. So RNG is good in moderation, but could very seriously hurt a game's competitive integrity if let loose. The first RNG mechanic that we want to talk about is the RNG Spray Patterns. It's something that has been around since beta, but I believe it is one of the strangest decisions in Valorant that is honestly quite unnecessary. Typically, RNG mechanics are a great way to keep things a little more exciting and introduce an element of luck. However, an RNG spray pattern hurts both the competitive landscape as well as the casual scene. Let's say you're a newcomer to Valorant or shooters in general. The spray control can be a daunting task with little consistency. Although the spray control in games like Counter-Strike are difficult to control, at least there's a set pattern to it, which allows players to gradually improve their muscle memory of controlling the spray. RNG spray patterns make it much harder to do so as you have to react to the spray each time. I get why Riot decided to do this, as they wanted players to not rely on spray control at longer ranges, but it does hurt the competitive nature of Valorant. A nice middle group would be to remove the RNG spray pattern mechanic and increase the recoil climb at the 10+ bullet range. This way, you'll still have the same close range lethality while spraying, without the random factor lingering around it, and still having the spray be the less ideal option at longer ranges. This gives more flexibility where spraying can be more viable at medium to longer ranges if the pattern is mastered. But it's not necessary, as strafe bursting side to side will still be more ideal. Overall, this mechanic has had some good intentions behind it, but I do think that it hurts the game more than it helps it in this case. Hopefully someone at Riot is listening to this suggestion because I think it will be a great change for both the competitive and casual audience. Before we get into the rest of the video, you guys know what time it is. It's time for our question of the day. We want to know, what do you think about RNG mechanics and which do you think need changes? Although most of the RNG mechanics we'll be covering hurt Valorant as a competitive esport, I do think having RNG mechanics is a great way to keep the game more inclusive. For example, Counter-Strike has arguably more balanced mechanics, but its higher skill floor makes the barrier to entry a lot higher and can dissuade some newcomers from picking up the game. I think Valorant has done a great job of keeping the game competitive while also making sure not to turn a blind eye to the more casual gamers. Changing too many of these RNG aspects or removing them entirely could be great for Valorant, but can also deter the more casual fan base, which would not be great either. Balance is key here, and I think Riot has done a fairly good job of listening to the community and implementing changes we need. Let us know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Now, let's hop right back into the video. I used to think that if you counter-strafe properly or if you're standing still, the first bullet fired will always be where your crosshair is aimed. Unfortunately, this isn't the case in Valorant. Each gun actually has a different first shot accuracy value. This is especially a big issue if Riot intends to keep the spray patterns random, yet also have your first bullet accuracy be random. This way, they're punishing both spraying and tap firing. This can feel very frustrating, as this mechanic should not be something people need to worry about or play around. If a spray is off or if a single shot tap is off, it should mostly be the player's fault. In Valorant, this RNG opens the door to punishing players for trying to get better at these mechanics, but also making it seem like both options can be random at times. Anyway, I don't want to get too in depth with all these values as it's really not important, but I'll be using the Phantom and Vandal respectively to get a better understanding of this RNG mechanic. There are many arguments to be had on which of these rifles is superior, and although it's a nuanced subject with preference that comes into play, the first shot accuracy alone does make it seem like the Phantom is the better rifle outright. It feels extra strange as the Vandal is designed for those one-shot headshots at all ranges, yet its first shot accuracy is more random than the Phantom's. I understand Riot's use of this mechanic, which allows them to better understand which rifle is better as the game is still being learned and tested, but with Valorant out for around a year now, these type of values should be consistent at least in the same tier, class, or reflective of the current meta. It's been pretty known at this point that the Phantom is usually the better weapon, especially at competitive play, so it's kind of confusing why this mechanic even exists to begin with, let alone be used to hold weapons back. Personally, I would love to see the Phantom and Vandal share the same value, because SMGs have their own value, snipers have their own value, etc. Removing this RNG mechanic could make certain weapons too strong. For example, imagine if the SMGs had the same first shot accuracy as rifles, but in general, this should be toned down as much as possible. I think first shot accuracy is not in the greatest spot right now, and coupled with RNG spray patterns, this can make for some unpleasant situations where you feel cheated. Now, some of you may say that jumping and shooting is realistic, but I want a competitive game, not just a realistic one. This one is going to be short and simple. Jump shooting is a mechanic that was discovered early in Valorant's lifecycle and is still a staple in the current meta. I'm not talking about any type of jump shooting, but rather the classic's right click combined with the jump. Although this specific mechanic has been nerfed quite a bit, it still exists and is extremely potent. You'll see players jump around corners, over boxes, and even fly in the sky while right clicking with the classic. So far, we've talked about the random mechanics that hurt the game. Well, this one is actually the opposite, because the classic's right click isn't as random as it probably should be. It allows for kills that don't really sit well with me. I think being able to get a jumping shot with the classic is a great thing in moderation. However, it's still a go-to response in pistol rounds or in a pinch. Rather, I'd prefer to see it as a crazy cool play similar to an operator no-scope if that makes sense. Again, I do not want it to be impossible to do, but it could use another nerf to tone down its power. Hey, if we're removing RNG from some parts of the game, this could be an area where we add just a little more RNG to better balance Valorant. We've mentioned in past videos that running and gunning is a quite problematic approach to the game, but we have to reiterate this point. Running and gunning is an RNG mechanic that works because movement penalties in relation to shooting are far less severe than in other games. In Counter-Strike, if you attempt to run and shoot, the bullets will fly everywhere. However, in Valorant, you can actually control a lot of these bullets and get fairly accurate shots on target. Riot did a good job on nerfing this mechanic on rifles, but it is still fairly rampant on some weapons like the Spectre and Frenzy right now. By nerfing the rifle's ability to do this and keeping the rest of the weaponry the same, you just make it easier for cheesy rounds to occur. As a spectator, I love watching upset rounds in pro play, but I don't think that applies to watching players running and gunning their way to a win. Because of how random and RNG-based running and gunning is, a lot of times watching it happen only feels like one person lost a coin flip rather than actually got outskilled or outplayed. As much as I'd like to see my favorite team win, I don't want them to win because they were lucky. The same thing goes for my own play. I don't want to leave things up to chance for myself or my enemies. Lastly, let's talk about agent abilities that make the game more random. To preface this section, there are a lot of abilities that add a random nature to the game. At its core, abilities do make the game more random as they add new variables and situations to a round. It's an integral part of the game, however, so we're mainly talking about the abilities that might be a little too random and unhealthy for Valorant. The two I want to talk about today are Jett's Dash and Viper's Ultimate. Starting off with Jett's Dash, it may seem like a straightforward ability as it can be used to dash a set distance. However, this free ability that has an instant cast time allows Jetts to play in positions that are typically unsafe for the rest of the agent cast. This adds more variability when you're trying to deal with an enemy Jett, as they can have more freedom picking the spots or angles they choose to play around. Not to mention Jett's ability to play vertically, and basically Jett has access to any angle. With so many more angles to deal with and the ability to get random peeked by a Jett and still live because of the dash, it just doesn't feel fair for those non-Jett mains out there. Next we have Viper's Ultimate. Viper's found a comfy spot in the meta as of recently, and her ultimate is one of her best abilities. We've all been in a Viper's Ultimate and not really know where to aim or look. Well, just like Jett's Dash, Viper's Ultimate creates a bunch of randomness inside of that environment, where it's very difficult to clear angles properly without taking some of those much needed guesses. Viper and her teammates could be anywhere in and or around the outside of the ultimate, which can definitely feel unbalanced to push into at times. With side takes having so many different flavors and utility combos, a lot of times you cannot find gaps in a situation where 5 flashes and dashes and smokes and drones are coming at you. As such, the sheer amount of utility makes this game hard to read, because it's almost random how much utility can be thrown onto a site. This gives the feeling of games like Rainbow Six Siege, where even if you're playing tactical, it's still impossible to cover everything due to how many random positions and utility combinations there are. Well guys, that's all we have for today. I know that we're kind of bashing randomness in games hard here. Valorant isn't at a state where games are just a coin flip yet, unless you're playing ranked. However, there are definitely some tweaks and changes that we think Valorant could definitely use to move in the right direction. If you guys enjoy this type of video, be sure to throw us a like and also subscribe if you want to keep up to date with the latest Valorant news, updates, and guides. As always, it's been your host Sergeant Frost, and good luck on the grind.